It's the display at the center of a free speech debate in America. The Satanic Temple of Iowa putting up this scene in the Iowa state capitol. Built with the state's permission, it includes a statue of a goat-headed figure, along with the 7 tenets of the group's beliefs. But not everyone is feeling blessed by its appearance. Iowa's Governor Kim Reynolds calling it absolutely objectionable, another Iowa lawmaker calling it disgusting. And tonight, outrage hits a boiling point with the display vandalized and the goat-headed figure beheaded. I want to bring in the co-founder and spokesperson of the Satanic Temple, Lucien Greaves. Lucien, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with what happened to that display. How did you feel when you saw the damage?
Well, they had prayer rallies, they protested us, they denigrated the local government for following the law and opening the public forum to all viewers, and they still felt the need to tear down the statue or the display that was put up by our Iowa congregation. I think it was a real act of cowardice. It's cowardice dressed up as heroism. It's acting like they're standing up for us when, in fact, when politicians do this, and my understanding is that this is somebody running for public office, they're really yielding to the whims of an uncomprehending, undemocratic mob, and they don't have the spine to stand up for the values that they swore to uphold when they took an oath of office. And I think we saw similar from Ron DeSantis in his comments about us recently.
I'll get to Ron DeSantis' comments in just a moment, but you know, the governor of Iowa, Kim Reynolds, she said earlier this week that she thought that the display was absolutely objectionable, but that in a free society, the best response to objectionable speech is more speech. She went on to encourage people to join her in praying over the Capitol. What did you think of that response? Were you surprised that it came from her?
I'm surprised that it did come from any of the politicians right now, and it's really courageous to take a stance for free speech at this point on either the left or the right. And there's a certain point at which we need some adults in the room to tell people what our liberal democratic values are, what their value is, why we uphold them, and what they're good for, and they need to stand up for these types of values, or we're going to further degenerate in our polarism towards autocracy.
You were talking about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis earlier. He is criticizing an IRS rule that was put in place under the Trump administration that designated the Satanic Temple as a tax-exempt church. Is he right, though? Fundamentally, did the Trump administration's actions actually give your organization a legal standing to have this display?
No, we have a system in place where we have a system of checks and balances, and we have static institutions like the IRS that work under a certain set of rules. And they're supposed to act neutrally in regard to viewpoint and just follow rote practices in which, if we fall within the parameters of the law, our rights will be respected the same as anybody else's. We don't want to yield some kind of power to the government to begin picking and choosing between religious groups. People might hate us and people might want to exclude us, but that simply opens the door to more sectarian battles, and it certainly won't stop there. Our IRS tax-exempt application certainly never came across Trump's desk. Trump wouldn't have comprehended it if he had seen it, and I think DeSantis knows that. It's just another display of cowardice from a politician who wants to play ignorant, I think. I think he knows better. I would be happy to debate him at any point. But I do think he is being a pathetic little coward when he tries to use us as a ploy to appeal to a mob of people who just don't understand what somebody like him very well should understand and should convey to the public instead of riling up fears and animosity between different people.
So what should we understand about the Satanic Temple group? What is the actual message that you're trying to convey? Many people would look at the name and they would say, is it satanic worship?
We're a non-theistic organization, but honestly, I feel that the beliefs that we hold take second place to upholding these values that I was speaking of. There's books available about us. There's been a film about us. We have a website. There's articles written about us all the time. People interested in what we truly believe can find these things, and they can see how we engage pro-socially with the communities that we're in, how we have various congregations doing good things in various areas. If they don't like the symbolism behind what we're doing, if they don't like the mythological construct that we appeal to, that makes no difference. It's far greater evil, I think, to allow the government to begin, as I said, picking and choosing, elevating one religious voice over another, because that's a downward spiral. And that's not what we stand for, and that's not what liberal democracy stands for.
You say that the belief system takes second place to the broader values of religious freedom. That makes sense, but I wonder, I mean, this provocative, construct that was chosen here, Satanism, this display, was the intent to simply provoke people who of Christian faith who might find that to be against their religion, not just objectionable in and of itself, but actually against something that they believe?
Well, for one thing, no, we don't do this just to provoke and offend them. But I also want to offer the caveat that even if that were what we were doing, even if we were offering criticism of mainstream traditional religious organizations, I would defend our right to do that. And that's why I have a difficult relationship with that kind of question. I really think, though, that if people did learn about us, they would find much less objectionable than they think. But some people aren't willing to do that, but our public office holders should do a better job, and they should have more elevated standards.
All right, Lucien Greaves, thank you. Very interesting conversation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.